With us being in the midst of the spooky season, I know many of you are actually looking for a cracking horror game to dive into. Xbox Game Pass is certainly no slouch these days, especially when it comes to scratching that creepy itch, and there are a ton of games for us to dive into. As my previous horror video was so successful last year, there have been a ton of updates since then, and we now have 18 horror games to cover in today's video. With that though, my name is Fletcher, and this is Xbox Nation, and let's dive right into these terrifying experiences. First up, and even though The Evil Within 2 is not as grimly horrific as the original game, it still does maintain that same gruesome, nightmarish-like visuals that we came to expect from this franchise. You step back into the shoes of Detective Sebastian Castellanos, but this time it really is personal. In an attempt to rescue his daughter, he must dive back into the world of STEM once more. Essentially, an idyllic mental community has been overrun by sadistic imaginings, and we have to trudge alongside Sebastian as he navigates through these horrors. There is a campiness though to The Evil Within 2, which is almost mostly missing from the first entry, making it arguably less frightening though. It was a shame, as the first really had you on your toes at every single moment. However, in terms of visual fidelity, monsters you come up against, and also the puzzles, it really is an overall better experience. After years of delays, Dead Island 2 finally arrived, and it was an absolute blast. Unlike most zombie games that lean into a sort of more dark and depressing survival experience, this one instead fully embraces the chaos and gives you a gorgeous open world of Los Angeles to explore and lets you go absolutely wild. Every single punch, slash and gunshot feels brutal, with zombies visibly breaking apart as you tear through them. The game doesn't just give you a bunch of generic undead enemies either, instead it offers a ridiculous variety of different zombie types. Whether you're smashing heads with a flaming sledgehammer, electrocuting your zombies in a swimming pool, or just exploring the beautifully ruined city, Dead Island 2 will never take itself too seriously. It's a stupidly fun game, and I know it's only gotten better since more of its DLC dropped, and I highly recommend you dive into it as soon as possible. Now, if you like the idea of managing a group of survivors within a zombie apocalypse, then State of Decay 2 needs to be on your radar. This open world survival game actually blends base building, resource management, and tense combat, creating such an immersive experience that evolves as you play. What sets State of Decay 2 apart is its emphasis on its community though. Every survivor has their own unique skills, strengths, and also weaknesses, and losing a key member within your group can drastically impact everyone. You'll be scavenging for supplies as well, fortifying your own base, and then making some difficult decisions that shape your entire settlement. Whether you go at it alone or team up with your friends in co-op, every session really does bring some new challenges and surprises, making survival feel genuinely rewarding. With State of Decay 3 potentially releasing in 2026, then it's well worth diving into this awesome zombie experience. As a shadow drop onto Xbox Game Pass over the past week now, I just had to mention Pacific Drive, as to be honest, I'm absolutely loving my time within this game. It's not a horror game in the traditional sense, as there's very little in the way of scares, but similar to games like Little Nightmares, it really emphasizes a dreadful and eerie atmosphere that keeps you moving. It is a roguelike experience, and you have to do anything possible to keep your car maintained as you explore the Olympic exclusion zone. Just don't take my word for it though, as this game has received so many incredible reviews over the past couple of years. If this hasn't been on your radar, then put it firmly there, and it's worth checking out as soon as possible. If you want to experience a more modern take though on one of the greatest horror games of all time, the 2023 version of Dead Space is a really great time. As you may know, the necromorphs are back in this one, and they're more gruesome than I've ever seen before. Every time you shoot one of them with the plasma cutter, you can instantly see their flesh getting blasted off their limbs one chunk at a time. The eerie environments of Dead Space have also been enhanced to perfection with lighting that is creepily poignant, and don't get me started on that creepy sound design. A great aspect though that does get often overlooked is that the USG Ishimura is no longer split up into sections, meaning that you can actually stay entrenched within that gloriously disturbing ship for as long as you want. This to me is the pinnacle of horror, and it's just such an easy recommendation in this video. You don't need to have played the first Little Nightmares game to really enjoy the creepy atmosphere and suspense-riddled platforming of the second entry. Instead of stepping into the iconic yellow raincoat of Six, you're now controlling the equally small, constantly in peril and bag-wearing Mono. You have to guide him on his journey of crawling and hopping away from some of the most monstrous creatures that Tarsier Studios have ever dreamed up. Unlike most horror games, there aren't really any traditional jump scares here. Rather, the frail nature of our protagonist means even creaky floorboards and errant shadows at the corner of the screen season will really fill you with utter dread. Little Nightmares 3 was personally a little bit disappointing for me, especially compared to the second entry, as it does such a good job of encapsulating that entire dread. Of course, Prey is solidly within the purview of Arcane's distinct brand of immersive sims before anything else, but there's a real solid case to be made concerning its survival horror elements. Largely following protagonist Morgan Yu's struggle to survive aboard remote space station Talos 1 after a hostile phantom-like species known as Typhoon has slaughtered most of the people living there, Prey actually channels both psychological and cyber horror elements over the course of its entire runtime. Supplies are pretty scarce, Morgan's morality is very well emphasized, and it really is difficult not to find oneself incredibly unsettled over the very nature of the alien threat that's overtaken this installation. Prey's sure to satisfy any horror aficionados' crave for intense, hair-raising encounters, and obviously with the occasional jump scare thrown in there for good measure. Honestly, if you want a Resident Evil game to dive into with Xbox Game Pass, you just have to try out number 2 above any others that's really available to you. To me, it's easily one of the best RE experiences to date, and I don't think I'm wrong in ever saying that statement. The Resident Evil 2 2019 remake is utterly jaw-dropping, and it's a really good example of how remakes should actually be done. You can feel the love and care that really went into preserving the iconicism of the original, but the updates of the control scheme and the graphics make everything monumentally better. If you love good horror games, or if you just love good games period, then Resident Evil 2 needs to be on your must playlist. It combines the joy of a good collectathon with the tension of a slasher film, all to provide one of the best gaming experiences that's currently available on Xbox Game Pass. Whilst it's not emblematic of typical scares that we see in psychological horror titles, Stalker 2 Heart of Chernobyl possesses the classic tension of survival horror games. As you wander through and around the zone, which is an irradiated and supernatural version of the area around Chernobyl, fear stems not from jump scares or musical cues. Instead, it's in the struggle to survive and make it from point A to B with your health intact. Enemy factions and vicious animals populate the zone, and there are also horrific mutants that soak up your bullets faster than sponge absorbs water. The balance of completing objectives against the reality of your situation creates Stalker 2's atmosphere of suspense perfectly. It's one of the best games that we saw release in 2024, and you just need to dive into it if you haven't done so already. I have to say that any major draw within any horror game these days has to be its unique and engrossing atmosphere. Dead Space would certainly be a lot less scary without the Ishimura, and Outlast's fear factor would be minuscule without the halls of the Mount Massive Asylum. As with any of these iconic horror titles, Still Wakes the Deep features monstrous enemies that you need to escape from, but what makes this one such a phenomenal horror experience is its environment, that being an oil rig out in the middle of the North Sea. You basically play as an electrician stuck in the rig after drilling goes horribly wrong one day. From climbing in the flooded tower compartments to near complete lack of communication with the outside world, everything that you experience within this title is heightened by this isolated setting. An oil rig on its own is a daunting place, and once you throw in the Lovecraftian terrors, you got one heck of a horror game but you just need to try out. Next up, let's dive into the world of horror with the casting of Frank Stone. This game is a narrative-driven adventure from Supermassive Games, and they're the same minds behind hits like Until Dawn and The Quarry. In this one though, you play as Frank Stone, an enigmatic character whose life begins to unravel as he gets pulled deeper into the sinister world of Dead by Daylight. The game features the trademark supermassive storytelling with branching narratives, multiple endings, and critical decisions that really do shape the fate of Frank Stone. There is a ton of psychological horror, tense atmospheres, and moments that will keep you on the edge of your seat, and whilst it is the weakest of the Supermassive Game franchises, it's still worth experiencing this spooky season. For those of you who are unsure of experiencing the terror of a full-on horror game, it can really be difficult to dip your toes into the pool of this genre. You might enjoy the vibes of a horror game just like me, but you probably don't want to cardiac arrest yourself with a barrage of jump scares and non-stop tension. If this sounds like you, then Dredge is one that you definitely need to check out, as it's a low-key horror game without the jump scares that are typically associated with many within this genre. In fact, many would even categorize Dredge as a cozy game, since you spend the majority of your time hauling in fish, upgrading your boat, and just visiting various folk. However, the uneasiness of Dredge really comes from that fantastic atmosphere of dread, or traversing the seas, especially at night. Monsters from the deep can appear, unsettling events can occur, and then that's when the horror side of things really comes into play. This is a phenomenal take on a horror game that we've never seen before, and is easily one of my favourites on this entire list. I do like to include a variety of games when it comes to covering the best horror games on Xbox Game Pass. All of these games so far either contain walking simulators, narrative choice-driven horrors, or just classic third-person horror. Even so, this next entry may surprise those who are unfamiliar with it. Inscryption is billed as a roguelike deck builder. Those words may not scream horror to the average gamer, however, one look at any footage of the game and it's easy to see why I just had to include it today. The game's atmosphere just oozes so much tension. It's a massive indie gem, and anyone who's played it so far can agree with this one, as it's one of the best indie horror games that's available on Xbox Game Pass. As its predecessor did, Hellblade 2 rattles your mind with quiet discomfort rather than inundating you with entire jump scares. You will once again take control of Senua, a warrior who grapples with both external and internal threats. Senua still suffers though from an intense psychosis that causes voices to whisper doubts in her mind, and nothing is more unnerving than crawling through a dark and damp tunnel with water dripping and rocks ominously cracking, and then hearing a panicked whisper mutter about how something is just moving in the shadows. The constant feeling of not knowing for sure is what makes Hellblade 2 a potent title in the horror genre. I love both games within this franchise, but this one really took the visuals up a notch and makes it such an incredible experience. As some of you may know, asymmetric multiplayer games can be a real hit or miss these days. They often end up feeling, well, just a little bit lopsided. But Dead by Daylight is one of those ones that actually nails it. The game throws one killer up against 4 survivors in this tense horror movie style setup, and it really truly works. The killer's job is to basically hunt everyone down, punishing players who get too reckless, whilst the survivors have to rely on teamwork and strategy to escape. When the group really works together, they can give the killer a really hard time, but if they panic or split up, it's basically a bloodbath. What's really cool though is that Dead by Daylight has been growing ever since it dropped all the way back in 2016. The devs keep adding brand new content, including loads of DLCs, and they pull from some of the biggest horror franchises out the market. You got stuff like Halloween, Silent Hill, and even Stranger Things, and it's like a horror fan's dream crossover. Survival horror meets high-stakes PvPvE action in Hunt Showdown 1896. This new version of Hunt Showdown takes players back to the late 19th century, where the bayous are even more dangerous and filled with tons of supernatural creatures and ruthless hunters. Essentially, you and your team must track down some horrific monsters, eliminate them, and then escape with the bounty, and that's all whilst fending off other players who are essentially looking to do the exact same thing. With limited ammo, tense encounters, and permadeath elements, every match really is a heart-pounding experience. The risk and reward system ensures that even if you lose, you might gain some very valuable experience. The game's evolving world also means that no two hunts are ever the same, making this an intense and satisfying survival experience for those of you who thrive under pressure. As I have mentioned on this list, a game does not need to be riddled with loads of bloody scenes or heart-stopping jump scares in order to be a top-notch horror game. As a matter of fact, the most important thing that a game needs to have within the genre is the right atmosphere. Inside is one such game that contains atmosphere in spades. Without ever having a character in the game utter a word, Inside tells a gripping story of a boy running from a hostile force that are out to capture him, murder him, or even worse. It does this by amazing environmental storytelling techniques. Inside never directly tells you about the world, and the ending is ambiguous as hell, but it keeps you riveted right through to the astounding conclusion. At first glance, My Friendly Neighborhood looks like a lost children's puppet show from the 90s. However, the puppets start moving and talking, and you realise something goes very wrong. It is a survival horror game, but with a real sort of Sesame Street meets Resident Evil vibe. Instead of zombies or monsters, you're dealing with disturbingly cheerful puppets that won't stay down, with ammo which is really scarce, and tools doubling as puzzle solvers. I love just how it messes with expectations. The bright colours and goofy voices make you drop your guard just in time for something really creepy to ultimately happen. It's such an unsettling experience without relying on jump scares, and it really leans to that weirdness of its entire setting. By the end of this game, you're really not sure whether to laugh or shiver, and it's exactly what makes this game so bloody memorable. What horror game are you thinking of diving into, or are there any that I've missed off this entire list? You'll have to let me know down below, and make sure to leave a like if you enjoy videos like this. Remember to subscribe as well for more Xbox content on a daily basis, and check out the video on screen now as I covered all the Xbox and Game Pass games coming out for this week.